M and W. 3 letters that sum up the quality and performance you get from the pride of Bavaria. But of course, if it's real driving excitement you're after, then you'll be looking for an extra letter on the back of your BMW. It is, of course, the letter M, telling you that this BMW has come from the company's motorsport division. Now, it no longer just looks after their racing interests, but in recent years has found a new hobby, tweaking and tuning your average BM and turning them into supercars. First off the block for the ultimate in makeovers was the M3, hot on its heels the M5, one of the most extreme sports saloons ever. The third generation M5 out next summer promises absolutely blistering performance, with its 5-litre V8 developing an incredible 400 brake horsepower and catapulting the 5 from 0 to 60 in 5.1 seconds. But as I said, that's next summer. Let's get back to the here and the now, because these are the keys to a rather special BMW that carries the letter M. Now, from certain angles, you may well think you've seen this car before. The flare of the wheel arches, the swell of the bonnet could lead you to believe that this is the M Roadster. But on closer inspection, you realise that this is in fact a very different beast. This is the M Coupe. The car to silence any of the critics who claim that the Roadster just wasn't butch enough. The M Coupe is packed with more testosterone than you'd get on a night out with the Chippendales. And personally, I think its curves and bulges are far sexier than anything those lads have to offer. This is the kind of car you can't ignore. Now, you may not be able to ignore it, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you'll like it. But what you will do is have an opinion about it. It looks to me as though it's just escaped from a cartoon. The low-down, laid-back hot rod looks are pure Looney Tunes on acid. And yep, I reckon that BMW's design guru Chris Bangle had a fantastic time when he put pen to paper and came up with this one. And while they may have very different bodies, the interior is definitely that from the Roadster. Gorgeous two-tone upholstery that comes in some fantastic colours. Glorious curves that reflect onto the passenger side, and of course all the chrome and those little red needles that promise you hours of fun. Now, in the coupe there is of course plenty more room in the back for all your bags than you'd find in the Roadster, but rather unsurprisingly the space inside the cabin is exactly the same. It's not fantastic, but I don't have a problem with it. What I do have a problem with is the fact that the steering wheel isn't adjustable. Now, you're paying £41,000 for this car. I find that very annoying. It's one of those things that when you live with it could become a huge irritation. But I still think it's gorgeous, and we haven't even got round to talking about the little letter M yet. And this is what you're paying the best part of 41 grand for. The tinkering and tweaking from the boys in the motorsport division will transform this car into a chariot of the gods. So let's talk for a minute about this 3.2 litre straight six that peaks at around 7,500 revs. Now, there's 321 brake horsepower packed in here that will get you from 0 to 60 in 4.9 seconds without even having to change up into third. There really is a seemingly never-ending thrust of power coming from this engine that sounds absolutely incredible and just seems to go on and on until you reach 155 miles per hour and the limiter kicks in and spoils all the fun. To keep up with old Looney Tunes, you better be behind the wheel of, at the very least, a 911. Behind the wheel, it smiles all round. The stiffness of the chassis brings such amazing levels of control that it's impossible not to be very impressed. Now, if you're a real driving fanatic, you might long for BMW's wonderful sequential manual gearbox in here to play around with, but I'm sorry to have to tell you that it just won't fit. You're going to have to make do instead with an excellent 5-speed manual, which is, I promise you, it's still loads of fun. Now, I suppose the question about the M Coupe is, does the price tag justify the driving experience? I reckon yes, it does. It really is a fantastic car. And for me, the icing on the cake is its unusual looks. It does draw gasps, stares, waves everywhere that it goes. I just love it. In fact, I can only think of one downside to owning the M Coupe. The rather large amounts of money you'd spend on hiring out a test track, just so you can get the most out of the feeling you get when your foot hits that pedal.
When you look back through the history of the British motor industry, well, we've always been renowned for our sports cars, but over the last 20 years, we've also become renowned for destroying our sports car industry. Look at the great names that have gone, the MGs, the Austin Healeys, the Jensens, the Triumphs. But one name that proves for all that small is beautiful is Morgan. Founded in 1909, the company is as strong today as it's ever been. In 1968, Morgan surprised the motor industry by persuading Rover to allow them to use the then brand new light alloy V8 engine, 3.5 litre, transformed the performance of the Morgan Plus 8 as it became, a real fire-eating sports car. And that car continues substantially changed to this day. Morgan bodies are still built out of ash, as they always were, but how can a car built today pass modern crash legislation with bodywork like this? Charles Morgan.
To go back into America, we've had to fit full airbag system, a depowered system to the car. And obviously while we were engineering that, we made quite a few changes for safety reasons. And we were very, very pleased to achieve one of the lowest injury criteria on a passenger dummy ever recorded at Mara.
Charles, the motor industry changing fast around you with foreign ownership of a lot of your component suppliers. How is that affecting Morgan?
Well, we watch with absolute fascination. I mean, perhaps eventually we'll become the only British-owned motor firm left. But having said all that, I think we've got to work with these guys very closely. And we've got to obviously have other things for them than perhaps volume and lots of orders. So our heritage helps enormously, because obviously they do have a little bit of respect for the fact that we've been going nearly 100 years now. And you know, I think the basic thing is to make sure that you know, we don't do exactly what they're doing. So we do actually try and do something just a little bit different.
But you're not thinking of putting the BMW V8 in just yet?
Well, that would be saying, isn't it? Anything is possible in Morgan.
You've got enough room in that chassis for anything. When the cars come off the production line at most manufacturers, they go onto the rolling road for a brief checkover before they're dispatched to the showrooms. Not at Morgan. Every car has trade plates attached and sets off for a 10-mile thorough drive around the hills of Malvern. So, Charles, tell me, how many cars are Morgan making today?
Well, Chris, last year we produced 500, and of those, sort of half were exported. We're going back into America with the Plus 8, and so we hope to build more like about 600, 650 in the coming year.
How have manufacturing practices changed at the factory here? I mean, there's still an enormous amount of handwork in the car.
Well, they haven't changed that much. I mean, we are known for our coach building. And the customer buys the car because it is a coach-built car, and what that means is it obviously has a separate chassis, it has an ash frame, it's panelled in aluminium. Having said that, the materials that they're using have got better and better and better. Even the wood is actually better now than it used to be. And obviously the processes that we use, you know, like powder coating or painting with water-based paint has improved enormously. But no, we've cut out a lot of wastage. It's interesting. I mean, now the car, on average, from start to finish, takes 20 days, whereas a year ago it took 38. And that's just purely cutting out the waiting time and the wasted time in the process. And, you know, we've cut our work in progress down from by half, really, from 100 cars down to 50 cars actually being part built at any one time.
There's been quite a lot of sort of changes to Morgan over the last few years. The car looks the same, but tell me about the car under the skin. It's changed quite substantially.
Well, yes, it's now got a 4.6 litre aluminium V8 engine. That used to be 3.9. So I suppose the major change really is an awful lot more torque. The cockpit's much longer now. It's easier to get in and out of. Partly this was because people are getting bigger. The milk's better or something, and a lot of our German owners couldn't fit in, so we had to create an awful lot more space in the cockpit. We achieved that with the same wheelbase, the same chassis, but it also was very important to incorporate the lessons we learnt during airbag testing.
So what's the future of this little Malvern company? Well, the order book is as full as ever, and they're shortly going into the States, where thousands of Americans will no doubt want a Morgan too. So the future is assured. From being the biggest family-owned British motor company, who knows, they could soon be the biggest British-owned motor company.
Think of a really important job, being in charge of a space mission, captaining an oil tanker, President of the United States of America. And the job facing the designers behind the new 205 was more important than that, to Peugeot at least, because we loved our 205s. Okay, historically, if you look at it, it wasn't actually until the arrival of the GTI versions that we really took it to heart. But when we did, boy did we. It became an obsession. We love our 205. So the 206 was going to be a very important car and quite a crucial task in redesigning it. That makes it all the more remarkable then that Peugeot took the decision to do it in-house. They didn't commission Pininfarina as they had in the past for the 205, for instance. And the result of that is this. And it's immediately obvious that this is no Pininfarina-styled car. Where the 205 was clean, sharp and uncluttered, this is fussy. The front-end treatment, though aggressive and good-looking, it's got a bit of an overbite and a bit of a saggy bottom lip. And all these lumps and bulges over the car, for instance, leading up to the wing mirror, the kicked-out sills and around the rear end. And the rear end particularly, well, if you ask me, I think it's got a bit of a fat bottom. But there are some nice touches around that lumpy, pumpy body. For instance, this, to protect it in a crash. These rorty, snorty vents might look like they're sucking in great gulps of air to feed a hungry, thrashing engine, but in fact they're to get air into the cabin to keep it clean and fresh. They also incorporate quite a lot of Ponham filters, and they look good too. It seems that historically the UK has been seen pretty much as second best when it comes to manufacturing for Peugeot. This is the first time that a new car is going to start being built in this country at the same time as they start to build it in France. So for the Ryton plant near Coventry, where they used to build the likes of Humbers and Talbot Solaras and Talbot Horizons and other such delights, it's pretty important, particularly when you realise the crucial nature of the 206 to Peugeot. But they didn't win the contract to build this car without a great deal of hard work. Let's talk first of all then about the importance of the car. Given the undoubted importance of it to Peugeot, why did you take the decision to design it in-house and not entrust that to Pininfarina as you have in the past?
Well, I think there's been a mixture in the past of design activity, and that will be the way it continues in future. But this car was designed in-house because that was the best design in the contest for it, and it seems to be the right thing because of the shape and style of the car. I mean, it seems to have been successful.
Given the importance of the car to you, how significant is it that it's going to be built here?
Oh, very important. I mean, we've planned for this for the last 3 years. We won the decision because of the improvements that we've made in the factory here at Ryton. We've made tremendous productivity improvements and quality improvements, taking up to the level of the best in Europe. And it was very important that we won the decision to build the car. Now that we have won it, it will help us in our sales in the UK. There's no question about it. There is still a residue of opinion in people's buying intentions that they want to buy a British-built car.
Just talking about the human aspect of this now. You're retired from here, but you still come round, you give tours, you're fascinated to see it, and obviously to take us around today. When did you start? When did you first see this plant? And how much is it going to change it now with all the automation, with the £100 million that's been put into it?
Originally I came down from a worked in Linwood, which is now gone, I came down in the early 70s, and this we were building the Avengers in these horrendous days of strikes and of everything. And now we've got a workforce that's happy in the place. As you can see, even ex-employees come in and help out. So it's a completely different environment. As you can even walk around that new extension. Years ago, windows were at roof level, or even factories nowadays, modern factories don't have windows because people think they shouldn't actually see outside, you know. Whereas now we've got actual windows that operators can have a better environment to look out and work in. You know.
And it wasn't simply a case of the contract to build it being given to you here, was it? How does that work?
There was a lot of heartache. We had a director come in from France and decided that if you're doing continuous improvement, which we were doing, he said, as long as the rest of the industry are doing continuous improvement, then you actually don't improve, you know, comparative to everybody else. And to actually get results, you actually have to do. And he introduced a lot of the double day shift rather than a day shift and night shift. So you get flexibility for a third shift, which is easy. So he actually introduced an awful lot of cost savings and everything else. Everything should be in the right place at the right time. And this is why we've got an investment now, because we're actually very competitive. I mean, years ago we didn't have the robots, it was all manual operations, and the consistency of well, position of wells was, when it's manual, is not very accurate. You would have the right number of spots, but maybe not the right number of exact spaces, whereas nowadays the robots actually will put a spot well at the exact same space every time. We now have laser checking equipment, like 20 seconds to check a full body shell. Years ago it was like 2.5 shifts to actually check a body shell. So nowadays, and we were building at 3,500, whereas now we'll be able to check every body shell dimensionally. We'll find out whether tooling's wearing, whether there's any deviation at all, very, very quickly now.
I was interested to see one load of guys tearing cars to bits. What happens there?
We actually physically dismantle complete body shells, complete major sub-assemblies, and basically what we're checking is the weld strength. We're actually looking at the condition of the weld, because a weld is actually should fuse on. So when you actually rip it apart, you should actually have a hole on one side and a slug of metal on the other side. And basically we do that for every major sub-assembly.
And the painting processes now in themselves are incredibly complex.
They are. They're all done with. I mean, there's very little waste in paint nowadays. Whereas before we used to have all manual spraying, and there's a lot of overspray, and you actually got that in the vehicle itself. Whereas nowadays it's all airless guns we use. We also use we paint in the body shell. One's positive charge, one's negative charge. So there's very little waste of paint at all.
I drove the 1.4 and 1.6 litre petrol versions. The 1.4 was definitely the weaker of the two. In fact, it felt decidedly feeble. There was the mid-range there, but in all honesty, it feels more like a 1.2. The 1.6 was stronger, with again more mid-range. It is an 8-valver, quite a drivable engine and quite useful around town, but certainly not something you'd ever expect to press on with, and certainly not something that is ever going to rev past about 4,500. The interior feels pretty well put together. It's all quite substantial in here. It's certainly not rattly and tinny like some French cars of the past in this class. And in this, the LX version, it's quite highly specified as well. We've got air conditioning, controls for the electric front windows, and a rather natty control behind the steering wheel for controlling your stereo volume and channel. But, and it is quite a big but, and I don't understand this, the whole thing appears to be afflicted with some unfortunate skin complaint. It's got this flaky, crinkled, knobbly finish. It goes everywhere, on the steering wheel, on the steering column, and I don't like it. It's like sitting on an elephant. It's like elephant skin. Why? The 205 was the epitome of French motoring. That kind of charming but unassuming, rugged utilitarianism, almost an agricultural prospect. And this doesn't have any of that. it's a much more finished car. It is a bigger car. It feels bigger, and it actually is bigger. It's quite a lot heavier as well. So over the bumps, the suspension will iron out and soak up a lot more of the indentations and bumps in the road. It feels like you are driving a car a class larger. The engines are available. There's a 1.1, a 1.4 and a 1.6 petrol, and the diesel. All the petrol engines are pretty unassuming, pretty unremarkable. They're 8-valve, there's no multi-valve configurations, there's nothing particularly exciting about them. That said, there's nothing wrong with them, but you certainly aren't going to leap out of the 1.4 and imagine, great, here's something really special. There's plenty of mid-range torque, as you'd expect from the small capacity 8-valve petrol engine. The diesel, as you'd expect from Peugeot, is quite a reasonable thing, but again, nothing desperately exciting. And overall, as a drive, there's nothing desperately exciting. It handles reasonably well, it goes through the corners quite nicely. If anything, it tends to drop off as you push it in terms of speed, but then these are not going to be thrashed. They're not boy racers. Certainly not until we get the GTI, and then we'll have to see what the suspension setup is going to be like. The 1.6 petrol is slightly different suspension in that it is dialed in to be a little bit harder, partly to cope with the extra weight of the engine, of course. But you're not going to push this too hard through the corners. That said, there are no little interesting Freiheits to enjoy and play with in the driving, but that also means it's got no odd quirks to catch you out. You're never going to leap out of driving this car, run into the pub and tell your mates what a fantastic thing it is to run around in. It's not an exciting drive. It is, however, very good at getting you from A to B, very good at getting an awful lot of stuff, including people, into what is only a small car. But it ain't no 205. In all, though some may bill it as the replacement for the 205, that's not particularly fair. The 206 is a very different car. It's bigger, it's more refined, and in marketing speak, it's a more mature product. But then if you look at the Peugeot range, it's a very different thing from what it was when the 205 was first brought out all those years ago. It's not a bad car, but it's never going to be as exciting and as full of flair as the 205. But then, life isn't anymore, is it?